Welcome back to the Chad Hasty Show on News Talk 95.1 FM and 790 AM KFYO. So yesterday became a marathon day for Texas lawmakers and our next guest who's covering what was happening down in the Texas Legislature as the House not only had the budget to talk about last night, but also there was some movement on property tax reform and some controversy about property tax reform. Joining us on the phones making a special Thursday appearance, the editor of A Quorum Report, our good friend Scott Braddock. Scott, good morning. How are you today?
Is it only Thursday?
It's still Wednesday. You're just in a dream right now.
It's a legislative day. Yes, we're still going here. The magic of what goes on at the Texas Legislature. No kidding. Sometimes they will go, for debating something on the Texas House floor or the Senate floor. This happens more in the Senate, by the way, where they will go past midnight, but it's still the same legislative day.
Right.
And then on the floor, they'll just decide that it's a different day than it really is when you look at your iPhone or your Android and you go, wait a minute, what? What's going on here?
Yeah, it just confuses everybody.
Yes, right.
Yeah, exactly.
As you mentioned, long day, marathon on the floor of the Texas House. They debated about 300 amendments to the Texas budget. Most of those were put in a drawer called Article 11. I was trying to explain this to somebody yesterday. Basically, when they move someone's amendment into what's called Article 11, it means that their amendment is going there to die. And as one lobbyist was explaining yesterday, it's just a wish list, and his date with Taylor Swift is sitting there in Article 11.
In Article 11. So Article 11 is the drawer, basically.
Yes, right. It's the round file, if you will.
So is it the nice way of saying, yeah, that ain't going to happen?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
It's the way that people get to feel good about the fact that they had their amendment there, but it's just not going to happen.
Oh, okay.
What they do is they once the House and Senate have both passed their versions of the budget, there's a conference committee that's appointed once they are going to hammer out the differences between the two budgets. And Article 11 is the first. That's all the stuff that gets. It's kind of like the stack of resumes where everybody has checked the fact that they have committed a felony.
Right.
So those things are those things are going straight in the round file, straight in the trash.
Yeah, absolutely. So you had
was
some
that
bills.
Graphic enough?
That's good. No, I think we got it. I think we got it on that. So besides the Article 11 amendments that were thrown out there, was there anything that really popped up that caught your interest as far as some of these different amendments?
What was really interesting was some of the amendments that were pulled down. For example, there was, and by pulled down, I just mean they just didn't go there, didn't debate it. For example, there was a amendment to keep disaster funds from going to undocumented immigrants. This could have been something that would have been very controversial. And the House leadership, this is something that was happening under the surface, leadership was making deals on the floor with various members of the legislature, like the Freedom Caucus members, like Mays Middleton from the Gulf Coast, to please not put the entire House through that debate and instead reward him with something else, which was allowing one of his controversial bills to make its way out of committee. One of the things that Middleton is pushing is a bill that would ban so-called taxpayer-funded lobbying, where cities and counties hire lobbyists to represent their interests at the Capitol. He's trying to make that illegal. And so what happened was, this is our understanding, he agreed to not put the House through a nasty immigration debate. In exchange for that, they voted his bill on taxpayer lobbying out of committee. So sort of an interesting way to do it. The House didn't have to go through a vote that I'm sure a lot of Republican members especially would not want to go through right now. And at the same time, he gets to see his bill advance out of committee. But, of course, there's a lot of steps before that would become the law. But he gets to claim a win on something else.
So how much is the Texas House budget?
We're looking at exactly $119 billion, just about of state spending. Of course, once you add in federal dollars, that's almost $220 billion document. And of course, the largest boost in spending is for public education. And basically, when they do the budget, they're authorizing certain money to be spent in certain ways. And so next week, the big school finance bill will be on the floor. So we'll have another marathon day, another Wednesday. That'll be a marathon day when they talk about school finance, because, of course, there'll be a lot of amendments to that as well. But what they do is they'll pass the budget to say, here's basically the permission to spend this money on certain things, and then the legislation to do school finance will actually direct exactly how that money is going to be spent. So marathon day yesterday and into this morning, a marathon day next Wednesday, and the property tax legislation, which you mentioned, which was voted out of committee overnight, that will be the following Wednesday. There'll be another marathon debate, because you can bet your bottom dollar there'll be plenty of amendments offered on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That'll be interesting. I think we're going to be down in Austin for that one, so that might. I will not be up till 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning for that one. But
come on, Chad.
I know.
Burn the midnight oil.
I know. Just stay up all night. Just do one long show. How about that? But before we get into the meat and potatoes with what happened with the property tax reform bill, what's the timeline now for the budget? Now it goes to the Senate now, right?
Well, they'll send HB1, the Texas House version of the budget, to the Senate, and the Senate version is SB1. That's how this works. It's the first thing they do is always the budget, and so it's the first bill, and they'll start working on reconciling these things. The Senate has been sort of start and stop on the budget. The House has been basically running on the same schedule. We talked about this on social media. The House has been basically on schedule like it usually would be for the timing of all this stuff, but the Senate's been running a little bit behind. Not exactly clear why. The Senate Finance Committee, which handles the Senate, the panel that handles it in the Senate, has done a lot of scheduling meetings and then canceling them for some reason. And people are trying to figure that out. But once they finally get it through the Finance Committee, the Senate's version, then they'll start working on reconciling the two spending plans. And there are some differences. I mean, the main difference is the way in which the Senate is approaching the school finance issue, which is to provide that $5,000 per teacher raise for teachers all across Texas, which accounts for about $4 billion, which is about half, a little under half of that $9 billion that the House wants to spend on public education, basically eating up half of the surplus to only do teacher pay raises, and that seems to be where the Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick, is on all this right now. Yeah,
and of course, for those who are, and we got a question about it on Twitter yesterday, watching for the Texas Tech vet school funding in the Senate, that's where there's that wide disparity in funding. And I don't know. I get the impression that those who are for the Texas Tech vet school are going to be disappointed in what the Senate eventually produces, and but we'll see. I think that the Texas Tech vet school people are going to be disappointed with what comes out of the Senate.
Yeah, and we'll keep an eye on it, of course, for y'all. And there is a disparity between what the Senate and the House want to do on that. And the listeners have to remember that when it comes to state spending, or when it comes to passing any sort of a law at the legislature, if the House and Senate don't agree, then it just doesn't happen. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, let's take a look at property tax reform. This was moved out of committee last night, but there's a lot of controversy and some groups that are not happy about what happened.
Yeah, and Chairman Burrows from y'all's neck of the woods, Dustin Burrows, he said, I'm paraphrasing, but he said last night that, look, if you've got all sides angry with you, you may be finding the right balance. Although it's hard to find the folks who are happy with his proposal on this right now. The 2.5% cap, revenue cap for local governments, very unpopular with those who lead local governments. Although there are a few who have endorsed it. I know some folks in Lubbock have, who are, I think, some county commissioners, if I'm remembering right.
Right.
But you've got conservative groups, sending out emails saying that this is not real property tax relief. And that the House is gutting property tax relief with its new version of this. In the meantime, Democrats, Trey Martinez-Fisher, who's a pretty liberal Democrat from San Antonio, was taking aim at Chairman Burrows and asking, why are they having to vote on this overnight? The vote on this, by the way, was around 1:15 in the morning, so if I sound a little scrambled right now, that's why I was there. And, it's the legislative process. It's at the discretion of the chairman as far as how he wants to handle the business in his committee. The critics of Chairman Burrows were saying that, look, you have the budget on the House floor this week, you have school finance on the floor next week, and it looks like property taxes are on track to be on the floor the week after that. So it's still not really clear why he had to, go ahead and force the vote on this last night. He could have even had to vote on it next week, and it would still be on track for that timeline.
Now, because in Power Texans they sent out this email blasting Burrows and Speaker Bonin, by the way. How did Republicans actually vote on this yesterday? And when we go back to the House budget. I know that Empower Texans wasn't happy about the House budget, yet did every Republican vote for the House budget?
There were Republicans who had said, I'll go back, the budget was approved unanimously, so yes, all of the Republicans voted for it, even though there were some who had voiced some concern about it being too big, too much government spending. On the property tax question, interesting, there was one Democrat who joined with all the Republicans on the committee in voting for it. So all the Republicans voted for it on the committee on the property tax question. And what that's going to mean for, this is the big issue this legislative session, what that's going to mean for primary challenges to those Republicans is yet to be seen. Of course, as you know, it's not so much that Empower Texans is going to score somebody badly on their little scorecard, but it is that they do have the financial heft because they are a political action committee and a 501c3 and a 501c4 that spend millions of dollars, as you know, in Republican primaries. And so if their financial backers decide that they don't like the way these Republicans are voting, they may fund challengers to them. And Empower Texans does have a history of supporting a Republican for a couple of cycles and then deciding they're not conservative enough and then finding somebody else to run against them.
Yeah, but this, what was moved out of committee last night or this morning, that's not the final. This is going to still undergo some changes, correct?
Oh, absolutely. And, when it's interesting, during the discussion on the committee last night, Chairman Burrows and that Democrat I mentioned, Trey Martinez-Fisher from San Antonio, they had a back and forth about potential changes that could be coming when this makes its way to the floor in a couple of weeks for debate, even though all of the Democratic amendments that were offered last night in the committee were rejected on party lines, Republicans voting against Democratic amendments and Democrats, of course, voting for them. The Democrats were trying to, in their amendments, offer some more flexibility for local governments when it comes to first responders, public safety, that sort of thing, but the Republicans all voted no, and so the amendments didn't get onto the bill because the Republicans have the majority on the committee. So it was interesting to see Burrows and Martinez-Fisher talking about working together to maybe make some changes as it makes its way through the process, but the Republican leadership was not open to any changes last night.
Now, and as we begin to wrap up this discussion, one of the pieces that I think folks on the right are concerned about with the property tax reform is that the school districts were removed from property tax reform, but according to some other reports I've seen, that's going to be possibly moved to school finance now.
Yeah, and it's a complicated deal when they're talking school finance, of course. But when the ISDs were included, when the school districts were included in this property tax quote unquote reform bill originally, as this bill was originally filed, there were a lot of questions about what position that would put the state in if the school districts have their revenue capped at 2.5%. Then that would mean that the state would have to, and by the way, this is not some political judgment that people are making in Austin. The state would have to put more money into public education because the Texas Constitution says that they would have to. The Texas Constitution says that the state has to fund schools across the state basically in an equitable manner. And so if the state dictates that the local school districts have to collect less money or cap the amount that they can take in at the local level, then they are obligated to put more money in. And the consequence, of course, if they don't, is that they would be sued once again by the school districts, and then the school finance system would be, questioned on its constitutionality, which, of course, has happened over the decades. In the last school finance case, when all this was battled out in the courts and the school districts were saying that funding was not adequate, the state Supreme Court ruled that the that the system was constitutional, but that it was not, that it could be better. Basically, the paraphrase a lot of folks like to use is that it's lawful, but it's awful. But right now, the lawmakers don't have that sort of judicial gun to their head to do anything about the school finance system. They're not under the threat of a court order, which has always been the case before when they did school finance reform. And so that's why a lot of folks have a real question about whether the state will really do school finance reform, because every other time it has happened, it's because a court said that they had to. And now that they don't have that sort of threat looming over their head, there's a real question as to whether anything of real substance will happen on school finance. And that's part of why these things are going to move to, I think that's part of why the property tax and school finance questions are going to move now separately, with HB2 being property taxes and anything having to do with the ISDs having, that'll be being packed into House Bill 3. Probably a smart way to do it. Yeah.
All right. Scott Braddock, editor of Quorum Report. Tell folks about quorumreport.com.
Look, we're there 24 hours. I know Chad goes to sleep at some point, but we don't. At quorumreport.com, you can sign up for our emails to find out what's happening at your Texas Capitol. Even if it is at 1:15 in the morning, we will let you know all about it at quorumreport.com.
All right. Now, Scott, I just want to say, I know you were up, really late and everything. If you were really wanting to jump on a scooter and try it for the first time, don't do it today, okay?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I don't want you to fall asleep on one of those things.
My balance might be off a little bit, even more than usual.
There you go. Scott, we'll visit with you on Monday.
Thank you, my friend. Talk soon.
Have a good one. That's Scott Braddock, editor of Quorum Report.